We've got a country that people need to stay connected with what made this country. Generations of people serving in public service and in uniform.
Memorial Day, as it's come to be known, I think is the most important of all federal holidays. You agree with me? As we take time to recognize the sacrifice of those who lost their lives so we could be free. As we come here today and pray and give praise for them having given the ultimate sacrifice, we must also remember their families that they left behind, the mothers, the fathers, the wives, the husbands, and the children. Many of these who lay here today lost their lives before they could start their own family. Many of them were drafted, and an equal number volunteered. And yes, believe it or not, many of them lied so they could serve their country. They remind us that freedom is not free. And I'll borrow the words of Miss Davis Hubbard, who said, "We were born free by accident based on where our parents were." But for the sacrifice of these, the second word she had in this little poem, that to live free is a privilege that's paid for and has been paid for every generation, for those who serve in uniform, who have kept this country free. From the beginning of our country in Washington's Army, and people often ask me what kind of shape our Army and military is in today, I tell them we're in good shape compared to that first Army we had, where people were fighting for something called freedom, while many of them were not free. They were not properly trained nor properly equipped. Yet they took on the most powerful army in the world, the British Army, and defeated them. Little training, hardly any equipment. And many of them were not free. Some of them were indentured, some of them were slaves. But they fought for the words in the Declaration of Independence that said we would all be free. They wrote a check over 230-some years ago that each generation must cash. And that is to leave America free for the next generation. The third part of this little poem says to die free is an obligation that we leave to each generation. To die free is an obligation. About 2 years ago, I was walking through the Atlanta airport. I was still in uniform, and an elderly lady walked up to me, pulled on my arm, and said, "I want to thank you for your service." And she took a good look and she said, "You're a little old to still be in uniform, aren't you?" She said, "I want to thank you." And I said, "You know what, ma'am? The best way you can thank me is to go home and encourage that grandchild of yours to serve his country, preferably in uniform." And she looked back at me rather defensively and said, "Well, you know, he is graduating from college this year, but he wanted to go to school up north and get an MBA because he wanted to be a millionaire by the time he's 30. And I shot right back at her and I said, "Well, who's going to defend him? Who's going to defend him?" And there are many ways to serve, but it's just a glimpse of the attitude today, because it brings to mind a point that our Army, Marine, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guardsmen, all our services are at war, but sometime when you go around this country, it's apparent the country is not at war. Last Friday, I watched with some amusement as many of the TV hosts, much of them spending a lot of time covering what's going on in the Gulf, told each other, have a great holiday weekend. And I noticed that what they did not say was have a great Memorial holiday weekend. That we lose focus on some time of what this 3-day holiday to America really means. And is to honor the sacrifices of those who've given their very last measurement for this country. Those who lay here today from generation to generation to keep this country free. Let us not forget their sacrifice. It brings to mind another note. And on the eve of Washington's battle on Christmas of 1776 at Trenton, when he was about to take on the British Army, he hadn't won a battle. He had to do a river crossing on a Christmas night. He had no boats. He had to go out and borrow boats from the local folks. He put this band of brothers together, and on that night, they went out and they killed or captured over 1,000 British soldiers to keep this country free. On the eve of that battle,